Hi guys, what's up? This is going to be my review of Trve Pentecostal Black Metal by Sherkinah. So I want to break this up into three different categories. The first being about the band and the album as a whole, the second being about his spiritual beliefs, and the third being about the ratings. So let's get into stuff about the band and the album. This is a project by Nocturnal Servant, and he is from Alabama. In terms of the history of the band, it sort of went like this. He said to himself, "I wish I could have my own band, but that's just not me." And then he later says, "God proved me wrong. The desire to write Christian black metal got stronger and stronger." He bought his first guitar when he was 19 at a used music shop, which was a PV Rotor EXP for like $80. Later that same year, he had a dream. In the dream, he heard a voice saying, "It's time to record your first song," and then he woke up. He was 20 years old at the time. He is now 22. A few days later, around the same time this year, he released the single No Light, No Compassion on his project Proven Existence. Later, he wanted to expand into other black metal sounds, so he created more projects, one of them being Shekinah. Let's talk about how he came up with this album. So he says that he worked harder on this release than any of the other releases he's done so far. He said he worked harder on the drums and that this is the first time that he ever used bass tracks on a release. He said he did a lot of mixing in the EQ to draw out the vocals and the riffs more than he usually does. He also says he spent a while practicing his guitar and doing vocals before recording the first song on the album. He said he reached new sounds with his vocals that he didn't think he was capable of. He said he added some tidbits of extra stuff that were unique to this release in distinguishing it from past releases. He says there's more to the release than that, but that's more or less it. He says he goes to a Pentecostal church, and he's been open about this for some time. He says some people feel like they have to hide what they believe because they are afraid of confrontation. He doesn't think he should be ashamed of who he is in Jesus Christ. That was a big reason that led him to make the theme of Shekinah. For this album, he wanted to further establish the theme of the band. He felt like he hadn't driven the point home like he needed to. He said he took a lot of Pentecostal theological knowledge and put it into the themes of this release. He says he doesn't go into full detail about his theology with this release, but it does make the point. As far as his influences go, he said he first got into Christian black metal with Antester's Omen around 15 years old. He says he loved the tremolo riffs and sliding transitions. He said it was different than the chugging breakdowns he was used to at the time. And he says he really respects these musicians. As far as the writing process, he says most of the time he comes up with the lyrics first. He says it could be after he prays or after he is very stressed out and needs to let his emotions out. He says he doesn't usually rehearse anything at all. He says he usually has someone do the drums, or he might buy drum tracks, or he might program them himself. He says he goes through phases where it feels like the music wants to pour out of him. He says he then plays any other musical instruments as the Holy Spirit leads him. He says he has a hard time with words, reading emotions, and expressing himself verbally. So he says with the Lord's guidance, he allows the music to express himself as best he can. He also says it's a way of coping with his surroundings. He says he can't do the music he writes within himself. So you could say his music is Holy Spirit inspired. He also says he prays that God's will be done with each album, song, or EP that he releases on all his projects. He says he asks the Holy Spirit for souls to be touched, changed, healed, and saved through his presence for anyone who listens to his songs. Now let's get into his spiritual beliefs. Regarding the occult, he says they praise false gods like Odin and Thor, while undermining and blaspheming the true God of heaven. He says, from their perspective, similar to us, it is all that many of them have known. Some of these people see their false gods as their saviors and can become offended if someone tells them the truth that they are false gods. He said it would feel similar or the same if someone came up to us and said the Holy Trinity was a false god or isn't real. He says the occult entices and deceives people and makes them interested in things they can't even fathom. He says if you look at these at face value, they seem to hold up, but in this case, curiosity really does kill the cat. He says these people are neck deep in idolatry and need someone who can see from their perspective and show empathy, while also speaking the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He says he believes that most, if not all, of these idols and false gods have some sort of demonic power behind them that draws people away into idolatry, which is a seducing spirit. He says you would have to have both truth and love to ever reach or save any lost, battered, and broken down souls. He says he talks to ex-Satanists, those who struggle with suicide and self-harm, mental disorders, those mistreated, and the like. He just talks to them. He says he does his best to listen to these people. He says he takes into account their suffering and then gives his side of the coin and lets them know how he got through his struggles. He says once many of these people dedicate their lives to stuff of the occult, and sometimes those into ghost hunting, are able to speak with people being tormented, it is usually too late to talk them back out of it. He says it can become increasingly difficult and at times requires a miracle to remove the deception placed over them by Satan's hand. He says anything is possible with God, though. He says most of the people being caught up into this occult nonsense are young people and the youth. Some are even kids. He says it's time for people to understand their false gods are feeble, false, broken idols that can't speak. And he says this seems rather extreme for some, but in this day and age, if you don't scream, you aren't heard. He says those indoctrinated into the occult, those who were not raised in it, are intrigued through morbid curiosity. He says it's heartbreaking, but we need to tell those suffering by the hands of the demonic the real truth, that these evil spirits are out for their souls, but Jesus can save and protect them, and they can have perfect peace if they submit to him, trust him, and believe in his perfect sacrifice for us. He says there's one major issue. Many Christian parents, for example, reject the young people's torment and treat it as nonsense. So the kids sense their Christian parents refuse to help or validate their child's experience and do what needs to be done, like having their church pray over them. So that causes their children to be pushed away into the world of the occult, witchcraft, and sometimes never return. Now let's get into the categories, shall we? Now I want to first say that there was really 3 stages for me with this album. The first stage was that I really liked what I heard. After spending some time away from the album, I went back to it after listening to some other music. At this point, I started to feel like it was a little bland, it wasn't exciting, it was just kind of samey. I then came around to listening to it and really trying to hear what was in the music. It was upon that time that I realized there were some good things about this album, and I do think that he has a lot of room to grow. This is of course a lo-fi black metal album, so keep that in mind. For the rhythm and weight of the notes, the sounds and rhythm are unorthodox and evocative. The speed seems to be mostly the same, but it does speed up and slow down in some parts. The layers are enjoyable, the heavy and lightness is dark and ambient, and the rhythm in a general sense is skilled and instinctive. Total rating for this is 1.8, pretty good category. For the notes and weight of the depth, the progression of climaxing is a little hard to identify, the complexity is intriguing and distinct, the composition is dark and unorthodox, the atmosphere is grueling and haunting, and the notes in a general sense are unpredictable and unrestrained. Total for this is going to be 1.9 out of 2.5, his best category. For the depth in terms of the listenability, the synergy is unique. The production, whether tasteful or not, is pretty devout, so keep that in mind. The noise or sounds are haunting and dizzying. The genre, whether original or defining, is fairly expected, and the depth in a general sense is heartfelt. 1.6 out of 2.5. For the listenability in terms of the rhythm, the flow from one song to the next is okay. The smoothness or choppiness is smooth enough. The predictability is, well, it's completely unpredictable at all. The groove is decent, and the listenability in a general sense is provocative, 1.3 out of 2.5. So overall, that's going to put it at a 6.6 out of 10. Now, I do want to say that this is not a bad album, especially for what it is. If you're into this sort of thing, you're really going to like it. But for most people that aren't into this sort of thing, they're not going to like it at all. So keep that in mind. Well, guys, that was my review of Trve Pentecostal Black Metal by Sherkinah. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye.